And State Republican Chair Nick Langworthy will join us in a few weeks when his party's convention is held on Long Island. But turning back now to the state capitol, we've told you that housing is expected to be a big issue this year in Albany. And part of that conversation is around something called good cause eviction. It's a bill that would basically set stricter standards for when a landlord could evict a tenant. And it's facing an uphill battle in Albany. Take a look. When New York's pandemic pause on evictions expired in January, a new push began for a statewide good cause eviction standard. And a bill at the state capitol to do just that started to gain steam. It would bar landlords from evicting their tenants without a so-called good cause, as defined in the bill. Judith Goldner is from the Legal Aid Society in New York City.
And what good cause would do is say, it's fine for a landlord to ask you to leave, but they're going to have a good reason for asking you to leave. And the good reasons are the kind of reasons that we think good landlords are the ones would want to have as the reasons to evict a tenant.
The bill would still allow an eviction if the tenant doesn't pay their rent, violates the terms of their lease, intentionally creates a nuisance for others, uses the apartment illegally, prevents repairs by the property owner, and in some situations, if the landlord needs to move into the unit. Landlords would also have to offer tenants a renewal lease, which supporters say is crucial right now with the end of the eviction moratorium. It's sponsored in the Senate by Senator Julia Salazar, a Democrat from Brooklyn.
But there are so many people whose leases may have expired during the pandemic or are expiring, who are either facing just a holdover eviction or they are facing astronomical rent increases.
But in the weeks since the eviction moratorium ended, momentum for the bill has hit a standstill. A majority of Democrats in both the state Senate and the Assembly don't support it, but many haven't said why. And Salazar says that could change as evictions head to court in the coming weeks.
It's always a process. It takes a little time. It's been less than a month since the moratorium expired. But I think as we see that actually happening, people will really see for themselves and understand the urgency.
In the state assembly, it's sponsored by Syracuse Democrat Pam Hunter, and she says that misinformation about what the bill would actually do has had a big impact on its progress.
I think that the kind of rhetoric conversation about people that don't understand what the legislation does always equates it to people who don't pay their rent now have this protection with good cause, and that's absolutely not what this bill does.
Both Hunter and Salazar plan to continue conversations on the bill to clear up any confusion and see if they can gain support. They say they're open to changes if the core of the legislation can be preserved.
No legislation has ever been passed without some changes, and I'm willing and open to have conversations about that, but we need to be having those conversations.
Opponents of the bill, meanwhile, want lawmakers to scrap a paragraph on rent increases. The bill would allow landlords to evict a tenant if they don't pay their rent, but there is a caveat. If the landlord raises the rent more than 3%, or 1.5 times the rate of inflation, whichever is larger, a tenant could avoid eviction. But critics say that won't work for everyone and could backfire down the road. Jay Martin is the head of CHIP, a group that represents property owners in New York City.
You're telling a future builder of housing, well, if you build this housing, you may not be able to recoup the cost on that. So they're automatically going to consider not building here in New York State. And that's going to lead to less housing. That's going to exacerbate the problem that we already have.
He's calling instead for the state to put more money into public assistance programs for tenants who can't afford to pay their rent. And that is something that supporters of good cause agree with. Governor Kathy Hochul has proposed a $2 billion pandemic recovery fund in her state budget, but it's unclear how that money would be divvied up. If lawmakers go along with it, that'll be decided in this year's state budget. A final spending plan is due at the end of March.